Chris Hensley is a registered representative of Cambridge Investment Research, Inc., a broker-dealer member of FINRA SIPC. Investment advisor representative, Cambridge Investment Research Advisors, Inc., a registered investment advisor. Cambridge and Houston First Financial Group are not affiliated.
The Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness presents Money Matters with your host, Christopher Hensley.
Good morning, everybody. You're listening to Money Matters on KPFT Houston. It's 10 a.m., and we have a great show lined up for you today. Will a computer replace you at work in the next 10 years? 5? 1? That worrisome question, once mainly the concern of blue-collar and low-level services workers, is becoming an increasingly reality for millions of educated knowledge workers, from attorneys and medical professionals to office workers and technicians. Is there hope for any of us when up against machines that think? Our guest today is Thomas H. Davenport, co-author of the book Only Humans Need Apply, Winners and Losers in the Age of Smart Machines. So please stay tuned. Thomas will be joining us very, very shortly to do a deep dive into his new book. But if you are a longtime listener, you know that we always use the first few minutes of the show to tell you a little bit about SOFA, the Society for Financial Awareness, who we are and what we do. This chapter, the Houston Midtown chapter of the Society for Financial Awareness, we are a nonprofit 501c3 educational speakers bureau, and our mission is to fight financial illiteracy. We do that by going out to different organizations, different groups, different companies, anywhere people already congregate, and we provide financial education seminars as well as health and wellness workshops. So how does this work? Well, typically companies will invite us out either at the lunch hour, maybe in the afternoon, sometimes even in the middle of the night for 24-hour shift workers. We've been known to do that as well. Invite us out to do educational seminars focused around your finances. And so why would a company have us come out? Well, for one thing, it helps them fulfill something called 404C. And 404C is an ERISA requirement that basically states that any company that has an ERISA-sponsored retirement plan is required to have a financial education piece in place. Now, a lot of the companies or schools or institutions are doing this by having their 403B guy come out or the 401k guy come out. And what happens is that when they do come out, often these seminars, these workshops are going to be more geared around how to get logged onto the website at the 403B, that maybe they're going to do a little bit about asset allocation, but there's not going to be a deep dive into the educational aspect as there is with SOFA. That is what we are really, really good at doing. SOFA is a multidisciplinary organization. I am a financial advisor, so when I go out, I may talk about retirement. I may talk about Social Security. I may talk about credit. We may talk about saving for some of the most important purchases in your life, such as college education funding, your first home, your first car. But if you wanted somebody to come out and talk about estate planning, then that would also be an attorney who has volunteered their time pro bono to come out and talk. If you wanted somebody to come out and talk about stress in the workplace, that would be a healthcare professional. First-time home purchases, that can be a realtor or a loan officer, depending on who is available at the time. If you would like to have SOFA come out to your organization and you are here in the Gulf Coast region, you can reach us at www.houstonmidtownsofa.org. If you're listening to the program on the International Podcast and you do want to have somebody come out to your city and state and you're outside of Texas or outside of the Houston area, you can reach out to the SOFA National Office, which is www.sofausa.org. And with that, let's go ahead and get our guest on the line here. Thomas, are you there?
I am.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for being on the show today.
My pleasure.
Well, I start the show always sort of in the same way. I'd like to share a little bit of your bio with listeners so that they can get to know you just a little bit better there. Thomas A. Davenport is the President's Distinguished Professor of Information Technology and Management at Babson College. He is the co-founder of the International Institute of Analytics, a fellow at the MIT Center for Digital Business, and a senior advisor to Deloitte Analytics. He teaches analytics and big data in executive programs at Babson, Harvard Business School, MIT, Sloan School, and Boston University. And he is the author or co-author of 17 books. Thomas, thank you once again for joining the show.
Great to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to see if you could share something about yourself, maybe outside of the bio that we just talked about, for our listeners to get to know you just a little bit better.
Well, I do have some Texas roots. I went to school at Trinity in San Antonio for a while. I went to school in Dallas. I taught at UT in Austin, and my brother went to the University of Houston, but I never went to school in Houston or taught there.
Well, that counts. You've got San Antonio, UT. That's pretty much state. Well, Texas is a big state, so you've actually gotten exposure to many different cities here. Well, excellent. Well, I want to kind of dive right into it because the book it's fantastic. Lots of information here. Why did you write Only Humans Need Apply?
Well, you have heard, I'm sure, and your listeners have heard all the interest in what will happen to us when machines get smarter and smarter and start taking over our jobs, and some people are worried that they're going to become our robot overlords and kill us all. That's not my particular concern at the moment. I'm a sociologist by background. I've always been interested in and worked a lot on what can people do when new technology comes around. How do we become more productive and effective with it? And so it just seemed like a good time to address what will really happen to us and our jobs, specifically when these technologies are prevalent in the workplace, and they're rapidly becoming that way in a whole variety of fields, including financial advising, by the way.
Absolutely.
You probably know.
Yeah. I mean, anybody who's following my field in the last, I would say, 2 to 3 years, robo-advisors, it's a big buzzword. We're hearing that a lot. And so, in the past, you've thought about people, machines replacing more of the blue-collar workers. But in the book, one of the things you're talking about is it's even information workers as well. So, are computers coming after our jobs?
Well, I'll give you a definitive yes and no on that topic. Yes, in the sense that they are increasingly taking over key tasks in what every type of worker does. Used to be it was, manual labor, and that has, to a large degree, been replaced in factories and on the farm by machines. Then it was service-oriented labor, as in bank tellers and airline reservations clerks and travel agents and so on. Now it's knowledge workers, financial advisors, asset managers, doctors, lawyers, marketers. So the tasks are being replaced by these machines, but not all tasks, and so that's the good news. We do have in the vast majority of jobs, we have a number of things we do that computers are still not very good at and may not be good at for the foreseeable future, and so not entire jobs will be replaced. There probably will be some job loss on the margins. Maybe where we previously needed 10 lawyers, we may need 9. Some people might not say that's such a tragedy for our society. But there are ways also to work effectively with these machines, and that's really the focus of my new book with Julia Kirby.
Absolutely. Now, in the book, you talk about what you call them smart machines. Just how smart are smart machines?
Well, it sort of varies. I mean, it turns out there are a lot of different types of smart machines. Your listeners may be familiar with IBM Watson. They've done a great job of publicizing the idea. It beat Jeopardy, and they're computers that, of course, beaten the world's best human chess players, and most recently the world's best player of this game, Go. Those machines are really good at certain tasks, as I suggested earlier, but a machine that's really good at Go can't play checkers. A machine that beats the best humans at Jeopardy is not going to be able to play any other, TV or any other kind of games without, a lot of modification and human intervention. So they're smart, but they're narrow, and we humans still have an advantage that we're much broader in our intelligence than these machines are. They're not yet... while these machines are getting into the ability to learn in many facets, even robots now increasingly have enough brains, if you will, to learn from their environments and to be aware of the context and so on. They're not self-aware yet. None of these machines are like some of the robots that you may see in movies like Ex Machina and so on, where they have a high-level set of objectives and they're trying to achieve those objectives. They can accomplish almost any particular task that we program them to do, and can in many cases do it better and faster than humans can, but we still have a few advantages, fortunately.
Well, that's good. I have in my head, I have this image of Terminator 2 with kind of apocalypse in the background. So this is a good discussion here because it's moving away from that. So let's kind of shift here, because in the book you talk about some solutions and you say don't automate, augment. Can you tell us what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, automation, of course, is the replacement of human jobs by machines, and we're much more focused on, I think, a more favorable and more likely outcome, which is we call augmentation. And the idea is that smart machines and smart people, hopefully smart people, would work alongside each other, and humans would do things that computers aren't terribly good at, and would also, almost treat the machines as colleagues in many cases, really focused on the things that even though computers can do, as I say, key tasks in a particular area, they sometimes sort of drop the ball or aren't terribly good at interfacing with humans, and so we can do those tasks and work effectively as coworkers.
One of the things that you talk about, in fact, the book talks about this quite a bit. It talks about being able to continually being employed, and what we need to do that you list 5 different options. Could you tell us what these options are?
Sure. So 3 of them are involved working very closely with these computers. We've tried to come up with some memorable names for these approaches. So the 3 involving, being colleagues with them are stepping in, meaning working very closely day to day with smart machines, knowing what they're good at and what they're not so good at, picking up, where they drop the ball, as I suggested. And, we've seen this in, for example, insurance underwriting, where we've had smart machines for a while doing most of the underwriting, but, sometimes some data is missing and a human has to step in, or it's above the policy limit, or, there's something a bit out of the ordinary, and that's an example of stepping in, where you're working closely with a machine doing that kind of task. Then there's stepping up, and you think of a hedge fund manager in that category. Most of the trading these days is done by machines of stocks and increasingly bonds as well, but somebody's got to kind of look over the entire portfolio. How's it performing? Do we need more automation, less automation? Has the world changed to make some of our automated systems less useful? And then there's stepping forward, which is building the machines of the future. IBM has announced that they're hiring thousands of people to work either developing Watson, modifying it for new industries, et cetera. So a lot of jobs there as well. And then the two categories that really are kind of a bit of an end run around what computers do are stepping aside, which is doing the things that computers just aren't very good at, highly empathetic jobs, highly creative jobs. So far, computers have not been able to master those kinds of capabilities. And then what we call stepping narrowly, which is picking something that is in such a niche that nobody would find it economical to automate. Think, in law, commercial litigation, a big category, increasingly automated. Maybe somebody told me that they have a relative doing law for malfunctions of automatic garage door openers. That's pretty narrow and probably not something that you would need to automate anytime soon. You just wouldn't be economical to do so. So those are the five.
Well, let's kind of that makes, you've said quite a bit of information right there. So I just want to make sure that we understand here. The first one you started in was stepping in. That was doing a job that engages directly in the computer system's automated decisions through monitoring or improving. I thought of like I've heard that a lot of, and it's kind of scary, but a lot of the flights that you take when you go on an airplane, a lot of times they're on autopilot most of the time, and then a pilot will step in and kind of make little small tweaks and that sort of thing. Would that be an example of stepping in?
Yeah, it is, and particularly, I gather, some airplanes, Airbuses, are quite automated. Pilots don't have to fly them most of the time, but if something goes wrong, they step in, or they supervise things quite carefully on takeoff and landing, the two most dangerous times. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good example. And while there have been suggestions that planes could be totally automated, and I think the same issue really applies to autonomous cars, I think for the foreseeable future, we're going to be more comfortable with kind of that kind of coexistence, stepping in oriented relationship rather than eliminating the human role altogether.
Absolutely. That brings up an interesting point, because we've had shows on here recently where we've talked about the gig economy and like the Uber and Google. I know they're working on driverless cars, and as a financial advisor, as somebody who thinks about risk, I always think, what happens when that first lawsuit when somebody's car accidentally crashes into it, or even purposely crashes into how is that going to work? So I think where we're seeing the technology there are a lot of question marks still there before we get there, for sure, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, Google seems to be pursuing the fully autonomous approach because I think they quite rightly point out that if humans don't have much to do, they tend to sort of tune out the whole process and aren't ready to step in when they need to. So, I think if we're going to have that mostly autonomous vehicle, we have to figure out a way to keep humans, engaged enough so they can step in if the situation requires it.
Absolutely. Now, what's the difference between stepping in and stepping up again?
Well, stepping in is a more, day-to-day doing it job. Stepping up is a more managerial role, typically, where you're kind of looking over the landscape, seeing the big picture of how an organization might be using automation and making decisions about, as I say, do we need more or less of it? How well is it working out overall? What's the general role in our company of people versus machines? So that's really what stepping up is about.
Okay. Well, tell me a little bit. Now, we talked about augmentation earlier, but how do you, after we know these five options, how do you manage augmentation with those applied?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think many of us humans would like it if our organizations would commit to saying, we know that there's some attractive features of these smart machines as far as, productivity is concerned and so on, but in general, our approach is going to be augmentation rather than automation. We think that humans still have an important role to play. And if you're really, I think, bold about it and want to be smart relative to people, you'd say, we're going to use some of these technologies, but we're not going to, lay anybody off just because we've automated their jobs. That would free up people to say, great, let me help figure out how I can use this in the particular role that I do, without fear of losing your employment. So generally, the problem with automation is it tends to kind of drive everything down to the bottom, in the sense that it may lower your costs, but then your competitor does the same thing, and you drive the margins and the profitability out of the business as a result, and innovation is much harder because you've kind of programmed all of these business processes into the machines. Once you program them, it becomes much harder to change them. So I think organizations will be much more responsive and innovative if they employ augmentation-oriented approaches than if they take all of their existing work and automate it. Humans are still much better at thinking of new things that they can do to serve customers and grow the business than machines are. And if you push all the people out of the business and have it all be machines, there's not going to be much of that innovative thinking going on.
Absolutely. So a happy medium is definitely better than worse there. Talk about, let's kind of shift for a moment, in being money matters. We have to bring some of the financial side into it. How do you think these big changes that we see coming will affect the economy?
Well, I think obviously there are pluses and minuses. I mean, the way that economies generally grow is through increased productivity, and if we did use some of these machines to grow productivity, that would obviously be good for the economy in a certain respect. The downside, of course, is if a lot of people lose their jobs, then clearly they don't have a lot of money to spend and so on. As I say, I think that at least for knowledge workers, we're likely to see job losses, on the margin, small percentages, 10%, for example, over the next 20 years or so from these technologies. For people who are kind of at the lower end of the occupational ladder, truck drivers, for example, if we have more automated truck drivers and there's some trucks on the road, there's some pretty widespread feeling now that for long-distance driving on interstate highways, that will probably be the case before very long. It won't eliminate human drivers altogether, but it will probably reduce the number needed. We have 3 million of these in the United States. So if you start laying a lot of people off at low levels of the employment hierarchy, then you got to figure out some way to support them. You don't want people to starve. So there are some societies, mostly in Europe, that are exploring these guaranteed basic income. Switzerland is voting on it in a couple of weeks, and Holland has done some things. Finland has some experiments underway. Whether we would do that in the United States, I'm not sure. But I think since work matters so much to human satisfaction, we'd be better off if we provided people with some, guaranteed work to do and, paid them for it, as we did in the Depression. And, that whole WPA thing, Works Progress Administration, Civilian Conservation Corps, it all seemed to go relatively well, and it, provides some meaning in addition to some basic income.
So I like that. That's a lot of information that you just gave there. We talked a little bit about just general job loss, but then we focused on a specific industry such as transportation. We thought about truck drivers and even just transportation in general. And then you talked about the guaranteed basic income and all of these. The idea of from reading the book, the idea of preparing for it, rather than just, hey, we're here, now the jobs are gone, giving a solution as to ways to kind of prepare and see what is happening with this technology, because technology is not stopping; it's moving forward. And so, having this be a part of the discussion. What other industries besides transportation? Talk a little bit how you think it may affect different industries as well.
Well, I mean, let's talk about financial services, which your listeners are quite focused on. And I mean, I think in this robo-advisor category, some takeoff of these ideas for the purely robo-oriented companies, the Betterments, the Wealthfronts, the Personal Capital, et cetera. But the big growth, I think, has thus far come from organizations, Vanguard and Schwab are examples where they provide some combination of human services and robo-based services. And to me, this makes a lot of sense in that, let's face it, in many cases, it's very hard to identify investments that will outperform the market. So as a result, more and more organizations, more and more people have moved to mutual funds and ETFs that basically mirror the market. That's relatively easy to construct a portfolio and rebalance it and do tax loss harvesting and so on with a robo-based system. What's not so easy is to persuade people to change their behavior. So, at Vanguard, for example, they have one of these robo systems in place in what they call personal advisor services, but they keep people in the mix to work with investors on how their behavior might or might not fit the recommendations, and persuading people off the cliff when the market is dropping, persuading them not to buy high and sell low, reconciling the diverse risk orientations of husbands and wives in relationships. There's a pretty big gap often between men and women in terms of their tolerance for risk, and that's you might call that financial psychiatry more than anything else. And companies like Vanguard and even the robo-only companies, the Wealthfronts and the Betterments and so on, are exploring these behavioral finance issues, because even if the investing decisions are supposedly made by machine, you still have to get humans to go along with it. And so far, humans are still the best at persuading other humans to do the right thing.
Absolutely. A lot of really good points there made. The debate going right now with robo-advisors and then this whole change in the industry that I'm in, a lot of good points you just made there. The second part about the behavioral finance, half of it, you've got portfolio construction, you've got people going in and analyzing the portfolios to rebalance and decide whether they're litmus test for whether you should be in that fund or not. But there's a percentage of being an advisor that is just based on the behavioral finance piece, saving somebody from the Titanic if they've done very well investing throughout their life and then they reach retirement and they think they can still use the same risk tolerance as they did when they were 20-year-old or something like that. Those things tend to be more of the empathetic side, where, as you almost like a financial psychologist, as you mentioned, there's a lot of truth to that. And when we think about behavioral finance, this term has become very popular in the last 10 years or so, but a lot of what you see advisors doing is kind of an answer to that question. So before we're bumping right towards the end of the show, what have I forgot to ask you that you'd like to tell us about the book?
Well, I think for a lot of people, the big question is this something that I need to address as an individual, or, is government going to jump in and solve this problem? And there are, a lot of people who write about this say, we need the guaranteed basic income, or, we need to have the UN develop a policy on, how robots fit into human society. Our belief is that while, those things might ultimately help, and there might be some government-oriented policies, this is really going to be, I think, up to individuals, at least in the short run, of how do we make ourselves more attractive in the marketplace, able to work as effective colleagues with these machines, and really, build our own capabilities through these 5 ways that we've outlined, rather than looking for somebody to solve the problem for us. It just doesn't seem like that's likely that we've outlined, rather than looking for somebody to solve the problem for us. It just doesn't seem like that's likely to.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of Money Matters Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, visit us on the web at www.moneymatterspodcast.com. Drop us a line on SpeakPipe on the right-hand corner. It will receive any voicemails, questions, thoughts, concerns that you have about the show. In addition to this, we recently launched a Patreon campaign. Click on the Donate Now tab to hit the tip jar and find out what Patreon's campaign is all about.